Linda Lysakowski, and I am really excited and intrigued by today's guest. Um, our guest is Reverend Maggie Burbank-Yenoki, and I know she's a pastor of the Monte Vista Unitarian Universalist congregation. I've worked with, I kind of shortened it to UUs. I know that you use that terminology too. I worked with a Unitarian Universalist church many years ago, and I have friends who still belong there. But today, what we're going to talk about is Maggie's role as a death soul midwife, also known as a sacred death care guide. And I think for many people, they've probably never heard of this concept. So I'd like to start by asking Maggie to talk about what all that means and how she first heard this calling and what kind of training do you get to get into this kind of work? So Maggie, it's all yours.
Wow, that's a big question, and that will probably take up our whole time together.
Right.
How did I first what it is? First, what it is. What I'd love to explain is that this is not something new, even though folks are pretty commonly hearing about death doulas. They're becoming more into the public experience, and people are actually being offered that service as hospice nurses and caregivers learn about what this can be for someone as they're preparing for the end of their life. There are different levels of this ministry, I'll call it, this service, it's a very ancient tradition. It used to be that you would call someone in when someone in your family was nearing their end of life. We call them death walkers. There are people that are very comfortable around death, and they're willing to serve at the bedside when that time comes for someone that's much beloved or someone that they just meet. Then they may not be familiar with them at all, but they just have a sense that they're needed and they step in. There are different levels of this service, and the training, see, that's where it gets complicated, because I wouldn't dare say that my path is the correct way to do this, but I can tell you how it happened with me. I began as a chaplain student, so a chaplaincy student around 2001, and I was living in New York at the time. So if you remember New York City, which was a little bit, to the south of where I lived in Syracuse, but still all of New York felt the impact of what happened to the United States in September 7th of 2001. I was already in my training to be a spiritual care volunteer for a trauma center hospital. And every patient that I went to visit to tell them about what our department offered them wanted to talk very deeply about what was going on. Everyone had the cameras on, their televisions were tuned in to what was happening. And that was definitely a mark. You might hear a strong gong when you think of our history and you say, wow, yes, September 11th was a threshold for our nation. And people were so hungry just to have somebody who was willing to help them understand part of and help them cope with what was going on. Everyone was confused. It was such a strange time. So that was the time when I learned, Linda, that I didn't want to be the person that just went to visit the patients and tell them what was available from the chaplains. I wanted to be the chaplain. I wanted to be the one that went in and actually offered the guidance that the patients were looking for. So that was when I started my training, and I took 1,600 hours of chaplaincy training. It's called Clinical Pastoral Education. And soon after that, I became aware that, I need a Master of Divinity. I need to go through seminary in order to be a certified chaplain. So, my life just opened up in that direction. I went to Drew Theological School and I earned my Master of Divinity there. That's in New Jersey. And not long after that was my first very close experience with death myself, because my new husband of only a few months, 7.5 months, we were married when he died. We know when we met that he had a cancer that was undiagnosed. So I stayed with him through all of his treatment and everything. And then he seemed to be better. And the doctor said, go get married. So we did. We did. And I don't regret that one bit. But my husband, Robert, was such a huge presence, a huge teacher for me about what a good death can be. No matter how difficult, no matter how unwanted and, all of the turmoil that comes up when someone you love is diagnosed with a cancer or some other, either an illness or accident or just through aging. Those are the three most common reasons people die, but certainly not all. But we can talk about more about that in a little bit. While I was in seminary, I met Robert, and he had every intention to go get this lump checked when we met. And we had dated about 6 weeks when that appointment came up. So what do you do? What do you do at that point? So I consider Robert one of my teachers, even though he was really terrified at one point, but he was so brave for the way that he went through his dying. And it was also an opportunity for me to learn about the ways that the medical side of our treatment at end of life can truly interfere with having a good death. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. Robert's oncologist was making decisions that were against his best care because she didn't want to lose him. She actually came out and told me, if I put him on hospice, I won't be doing my job. Actually, putting him on hospice would have been her best job, because that's what he needed. It truly is, because the day he died, we spent most of that day having the bed brought in and the oxygen, all of the things that hospice means, and it's how it changes your life when those things come into your life. So that should have been a day that we spent connecting with connecting our souls and our relationship and saying goodbye to each other. But instead, he was only alive 3 hours after he got into the bed. So that day, and that's only one example, but I believe that people are becoming more aware and taking more control of the path they want for their end of life. And that's another gift that a soul guide, a midwife, a soul tender, there's so many names for this end of life care. But the way I see it, and it's, this is me, there are no regulations. And that's both a blessing and kind of a sticky difficulty, because there certainly are people who name themselves as doulas who are just as trained as I am and ready to go into the bedside and really help at the end of life, to be a sacred death care guide. But then you can become a doula. You can call yourself a doula in our community, in our culture now. The term doula could be someone who took a course, maybe online, to earn a credential to call themselves that. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but it's a different level of care, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. There are those who come into this relationship with someone who is at the end of their life, and they are there to help serve. They will do the massages, and they will, run the errands, and they will, take care of so many of the ordinary physical needs of the dying person. But a soul midwife is someone who dares to go in a stronger way, is in a more soulful way, in a spiritual way, with courage, and to be a bridge builder between the dying person and, let's call it, heaven. So much of this conversation is really based on what your perception, your particular theology, your perception of what happens at the end of life. Is there anything? Is there heaven? And everything in between. So it's difficult to find the exact words that everyone is going to say, yes, 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 I believe that, I hear that. So one of the things that I always make sure is that I meet people where they are. And learning a little bit about the person can be so helpful. But the goal is always the same. The goal is always the same for me. And I work with doulas, who are there. And many of my friends are doing this work as well. But we are there to help. And I like to use this image I was taught by one of my trainers. Her name is Dr. Sarah Kerr, Kerr. It's wonderful. She runs the Center for Sacred Death Care. And she says, when the soul is separating from the body, that's where we are to help that process happen. And may it be a beautiful experience. It was Stephen Jenkinson who said, a good death is one that becomes a village-making event.
That's powerful.
Isn't it? Isn't it? Yeah, because you do. Now, if you think about a village and all the different relationships and all the different roles, and they're all so essential, even to the person that makes the tea, who's going to put the kettle on? That's an important question. And sometimes, because of someone's personal fear of death or preference to stay distant, having that to do can be a wonderful gift to them, that they have something that they could do to be a
whole concept of a village. It just brought to my mind many years ago. We heard about it takes a village to raise a child. And I guess we never thought, I never thought of it. It probably takes a village to say goodbye to a life too, as well as to welcome new life. So that was pretty fascinating.
is, Linda. And the beauty of this work is so much of it is reflected in birthing and dying. Even the term midwife, it's more commonly used and maybe more commonly comfortable for souls that are coming into life. In other words, when someone is incarnating, right? They're coming into their body and being born into our world here on earth. And that is also a threshold. It's a threshold for a soul that was somewhere else before they came here. We know that. We know that when we look at that child, when they're first born and we say, wow, who are you? They're not a clean slate. They're just a beautiful soul that came from love and is here to bring their gifts into life. And then when their lives are finished, they'll go out again. And my work is at that threshold where they're going out again. And sometimes it's just a conversation with someone with a new diagnosis, just to help them see it differently. Or maybe in the case of a graveside ceremony that I'll be doing this afternoon, it's someone that I knew and loved, and we shared so much about life and death in our long relationship that he just many weeks ago said to me, I want you to come and say a prayer at my funeral. So I'll do that because that's what he asked for, and his family respects that. So the work is so varied and it's so deeply soulful. I use every bit of my training with every person
I'm sure you do. Yeah, one of the things that you said that in the very beginning that sort of fascinated me, and I think we see this in many things going on in our world today, is a return to those ancient practices. And you mentioned that this is really an ancient practice, but there seems to be a greater interest and renewal of this practice. Can you tell me a little bit about, I'm sure you studied, where did this originate? How did this whole concept come about? And is it thousands of years old, tens of thousands of years old? Um,
Yes. From the beginning of humanity's time. And if we even look into the animal realms, we can see how even the animals, the elephants, the crows, so many animals surround and take care of their dying and their dead. They hold funerals. They
wow.
hold spiritual threshold open for their loved one that's died, and they grieve. They grieve.
Hmm.
It's so beautiful. It's that ancient. And if we go back to even, for those who have a Christian tradition, go back to the experience of Jesus's death, when his mother held him after, but also when Mary Magdalene went to anoint him. That sacred anointing with spikenard that she washed his feet the night before he was crucified, because she knew that was a preparation for death. And spikenard is used in my tradition to help the body to prepare for death. There's a sacred oil massage that can be used in an anointing of the dead that the Catholics are familiar with, and it's usually done by a priest, but it's also a comfort that has always been available across cultures in our world from the ancient times. But the story I've been told, and the one that makes a lot of sense to me, is that during the Civil War, the soldiers that had died in war were so far away from their families, but they knew, the military knew, they knew that this body had to get home to its family, because the family is the one that takes care of a body at death. So in order to do that, they came up with what we know now as embalming. And that kept the body from deteriorating while they moved it home and delivered it to the family. So that was when the culture started shifting toward what we say is a funeral home, but let's reverse those back and go back to a home funeral.
That's powerful. And I've actually been to what we used to call viewings or wakes in a person's home, and it kind of shocked me at first. I thought, why are they not using a funeral home? But it makes sense now.
Sure does. It sure
Mm.
does.
Tell me a little bit. You've mentioned different terms: doula, midwife, guide. Um, what is the difference? Is there a difference between all of these groups, or?
Not regulated. Like I say, my answers are my understanding. And as long as everyone who listens in understands that, I'm not laying down any rules about that because it isn't regulated. But I think how each person identifies themselves and feels comfortable in their training is how they name themselves. So I call myself a death midwife, but I'm actually working through Felicity Warner, who is in London area, and she is certifying me as a soul midwife. So the soul midwife does the work that we're speaking of and can also help people across other thresholds as well, not just at the end of life. Say you're going through a terrible divorce. Say you have to move to another state. and you have to leave the home you were raised, your grandmother was raised in, your grandmother was born in this house. How can you sell it? Or, let's talk about what's going on right now with so much loss in our country. When we think about the families that are grieving from the loss of their children and their loved ones in the flooding, and then think of all the homes here. I'm in the Los Angeles area, and we just have so much grief. It hangs over LA like a pall right now. And from the fires, the Eaton fire and the Palisades fire, that took away 9,000 homes within one day, if you can imagine that. And it's only 6 months now. Just 6 months ago, we just passed the 6-month anniversary of that. And the stories are coming out, and the people are beginning to rebuild, and some are finding that they can't rebuild. All of these things are too much for one person to work through in their life. So they seek the counsel of someone who's a midwife, who can midwife them over that threshold and out of this trauma. Let's call it a trauma. Let's call it what it is.
Right.
I was going to say difficulty, but it's beyond that. And so many difficult things are coming on all of us now. I'm sure everyone who's listening will know that as well, because they're witnessing it in their own lives. So it's a very hard time, and we need each other to help each other through.
You said something earlier about people's concept of dying. Some believe that there is a heaven, some probably don't believe there is a heaven. So, are there different ways that you envision this journey with different people based on their beliefs as they're dying? How do you work with all that?
Yeah, interesting. Yes, I do. I have my own perception, and some of it comes from Thich Nhat Hanh's teaching that there is no death, that we are eternal beings and we have eternal life, and we're born in, we live, and we're born out. So our energy, our life, our identity continues on. And from that perspective, I love being able to be with people and help them explore what they believe. Some people just take whatever they were taught because they're not here on a spiritual quest, just here to be a good person and, live their life and take care of their family and farm their land or whatever it is. If they're the best plumber on earth, or they, a good fireman, or, they don't think about this ever in their life. And here they are confronted with it. So it's too much to take on in a short amount of time. Can you imagine trying to maneuver through your whole spiritual life in just a few weeks, if you have that, So yes, I can meet anybody anywhere and help them. And for those who have no concept of an afterlife, despite the evidence and despite maybe, opening towards someone who's experienced it before, whether you believe them or not, but just to hear their story. Some poo-poo it and they say, oh, that's rubbish, and they won't even listen. But for someone, who doesn't believe, and I've had several, as Unitarian Universalists have a vast theology, and some of them think we're here, we're an energy that popped up and then we fade out and poof, we're gone. Well, I ask them to not be surprised.
That's your answer.
I said, let's go with that, but promise me you won't say no when you're offered something better.
That's a great concept. I have to remember that. One of the things that you mentioned earlier is that sometimes doctors make decisions that we don't always agree with. I'm wondering if a person's doctors want to keep them alive, but maybe they are ready for death. How do you deal with that?
Sometimes there's a difficult conversation with the medical team. I must share that lately, in recent years, the medical societies have come a long way in doing truly what's best for the patients and for shifting their perspective on death. They always saw death as a failure, and we all do as well. That kind of lingers like a bad smell in our culture that, death is something we should avoid. It shouldn't be something that we go toward or learn about or look for in our daily life. But if you like autumn and you watch what happens to those maple trees, when autumn comes, they wither, they're beautiful, and they die. There's evidence in nature. There's evidence in every snowflake that's individuated. There are no two snowflakes alike. What is that? Is that just coincidence? And when they land on your nose or your eyelash, they melt and they're gone. There's a coming and a going.
I think that's so true. If you have someone in your life that maybe is in need of a soul midwife, are there certain signs that you look for to people? Most people probably aren't going to say, hey, I need a death midwife, I assume. But what are the signs that loved ones should look for when they do have someone in their family that they know is ready for a midwife?
Actually, there are many people who put that in their advancce directives that they do someone, usually it's someone that they have a relationship with and they want them specifically to come in. But it is becoming more popular for people to ask for that. But, it depends on getting out. It depends on people listening to this and say, you know what, I would really love someone to come and just help me when things arise, because they do. As we're dying, there's so many different stages of dying that we need help with. It's too much to do alone. And there's no reason why you have to do it alone. Some people prefer that, and that works well for them. But for the most part, most people benefit from having someone there who can help them find their answer. And isn't that the key? I don't have anyone's answers. I don't have a special cache of knowledge. Well, maybe I do, more than the average person, how to do this journey. But what I don't have is that individual person's soul print image of what they need or want or are curious about or what they're experiencing. Some people have visits from other ancestors that have already passed, and it terrifies them. I could be there and help a conversation to happen that's calming. Family members who don't know anything about the dying process might say, uh-oh, time to give him more morphine. He's having visions. Those visions are good. They're beautiful. Don't medicate them. Dive into them. And that's what a soul midwife is there for.
That's really interesting that you said that, because when my husband was dying, they ordered morphine for him and everyone got there in time. And I think that was meant to happen, but
Can be good. Yeah.
I think we all have different experiences. Is it ever like too late? Well, he's already gone or he's ready to go. Is it too late ever to call in the death midwife?
I don't believe so. Even if the body has stopped functioning, there are ministries that a soul midwife can offer. There's an anointing of the body. There's a washing of the body that will include the family members in. There's a preparing, a cleansing, and a dressing of the body. There's an anointing where you would use maybe myrrh or a patchouli is a very grounding scent. And you would anoint the chakras of the body, but also you anoint their hands and you say, thank you for all of the things that your hands did. You anoint their throat and you say, "We thank you for every word you ever spoke that blessed us all, for everything that you taught us." We anoint their heart and say, "Thank you for your beautiful heart." And it's just such a moving ritual that makes such a difference in the way the grief journey goes for the beloved ones of the person that has died.
That's incredible. I use myrrh a lot myself, and somebody said to me, "Why are you using that? Because isn't that what they anoint the dead with?" I said, well, for me, it helps me physically while I'm still alive. So. But I think people have different perceptions. What about in case of a sudden death or maybe even a death by suicide? Is there so something that you can do for that person?
Yes. The it's very complicated with suicide, and we talked about how each birth is unique and each death is unique. And a death by suicide is often attributed to mental illness. And there's a long history of familial struggle, to either help this person heal or to suffer and take a lot of harm from them that they're not capable of doing much about, if you know what I mean. Someone with a mental illness might commit a crime that is harmful. And one thing that I'd love to share is that there's a new term and a new way to phrase a suicide. We don't say commit. There was such a sinful weight that was put on a suicide, and it isn't a crime we commit, or like a murder. We commit a murder, we commit adultery, but we don't commit suicide. So we say someone has suicided or they have chosen suicide, because suicide does mean to end your own life,
Hmm.
and but that's just a little aside, but it's also very important to this setting, and also with the ritual, because the ritual is so important. If they have the body, sometimes they don't, because the body is so damaged by the choice of the person who died. If they died by a gunshot, sometimes you can't be with the body. So what we might do, if the family was amenable to this, we might create like what is called a proxy body ritual, where we would put their clothing, bring mementos of them, put those things that bring that person to us, and we talk to the body and we anoint it. And there's so much you can do. And it's so flexible. It has to fit the family and it has to fit the deceased person. So when there's a difficult death or a sudden death, there's so much grief involved. And a lot of my care has to do with that. Trying to make, and ritual helps with that in a way that we can't understand as humans, but it levels, if you think about the energy that's inside of us when someone that we love has suicided. There's a lot of anger, usually, so much sadness, exasperation, like if only this, So the ritual can at least start to balance the energy on the outside. So the energy of our life and our relationship with this person is shifted a bit so that it can start to match the huge energy that we carry inside.
This is just really fascinating to me. I think when I think about all of this, I think we all are going to face death of a loved one and our own death at some point in time, certainly. Um, but I think it's really fascinating that there are people that can help with this process. And I think you said this earlier, your different faith perspectives might tell you that's it, that's the end, there is no afterlife, and other people are looking forward to the afterlife. Um, but I think there's so much that could be learned about this. Are there some resources? I don't know if you've written any books on this or if you've thought about writing a book on it, or is there some resources that we can send people, like, how do they find someone to do this if they don't have a friend or an acquaintance who is a death midwife? How would you go about finding a death midwife?
Well, that's something that's changing as well. There are becoming some guilds and some groups that are starting to admit, like the Soul Midwives are going to create a directory for my training with Sarah Kerr and the Center for Sacred Death Care. We're going to be putting together a directory that will be published. You could go online. I would say Google it, because that's what the phrase everybody is.
And we'll certainly give our viewers the link to the center that you mentioned, because I think that could be helpful.
Yes, yes. In Los Angeles area, there's also someone I trained with named Olivia Barham. She's a reverend as well, and she is a death midwife, and she's also a funeral director.
Oh.
So you can do the whole process through Sacred Crossings, and that's mostly in LA area. How far she has people stretch, how far people are expanding out. So it's becoming, another resource is the NHFA, National Home Funeral Association. They have a directory, and I believe I'm in it. So people should be able to get hold of me through there if they choose.
Well, you certainly give them, if you send me the links, we'll make sure everybody gets the links to all these sources, because I think a lot of people probably don't know where to turn. And especially if they don't, many people don't even have a clergy person that they could call. So, who do they get to be with them? I have maybe a strange question to ask, but I was kind of curious about, after the person dies, have you had experiences with family members who say that the person came to them after death? And just if you can just talk a little bit about that.
Yes. That's a common experience. Many people poo-poo it. Many people don't welcome it. So it cannot happen without someone being open to it. It's kind of a covenant that is made between the living and the dead, that the dead they cannot influence you or come into your perspective without you agreeing to it at some level. So maybe you're praying and asking, please let me know you're okay, is probably enough for them to be able to come in either as a dream or as a perspective. If our animals do the same thing. After you've lost an animal, out of the corner of your eye, you'll see your cat. It's very real, and it's true also with our human loved ones. What I would like to explore a little bit is the teaching that after the soul and the body separate, the soul has an experience of its own. And it lasts about 3 days. If you remember in scriptures, they talk about how Jesus was in the tomb for 3 days. But there's a time, it's called the Bardo time. Maybe you've heard that term before.
I have not. Is it B-A-R?
B-A-R-D-O. It's an in-between place where the person who's died has to realize that they're dead, because some don't, and they also have a time with their guides and loved ones and ancestors, and they're surrounded by incredible, indescribable love, and they look back at their life. Some call it a life review, where you said and you are shown ways that you brought your gifts into the lives of people. And sometimes you're shown difficult things, but it's never, ever to punish you. It's just to show you, this is what happened when this happened, and you can just sense that, sense the difficulty. It's not all angels on clouds playing harps, it's real, and it's very deep and very meaningful. your bardo time. It's very sacred. And usually you don't have much contact with your loved ones at that time, however long that is. But it's a little while after. And that's usually when we have the wake. We'll have, the wake, and we take those 3 days of mourning. It's so important.
It is. This has just been fascinating conversation, and I know you're about ready to go and do some of your work, so I don't want to keep you too long, but maybe we'll have you back again to hear more about your experiences. But I think this is not only fascinating, but I think it's very, I don't know what word to use. All I can think of is soothing for someone who is going through this to know that there's help available and to know that this is real and it's been going on for thousands and thousands of years and that people can be helped by this. So I really want to thank you for your time. And is there any final words that you want to leave us with before we close?
Hmm. I don't have any specifically prepared, and I don't have a farewell message that I always offer to close a conversation, because everything that I do is so based on who I'm talking to.
Mhm.
You never want to present something that causes someone to trip over your words instead of being soothed by them. So I'm real careful about that. But what I'd love to just offer and suggest to people is they open death's door just a little bit. That's the name of my website and my work.
Oh,
Opening
open that store. That's fascinating.
day, he's been he's at death's door, and the doctors are trying to pull him through. So I'll leave you with that joke. But
Okay, well, thank you so
to just
much.
in that doorway, just a little bit, to learn a little bit more about death and prepare yourself for the death of those around you. Just open yourself to hearing the messages that death has for you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Maggie. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to be with us. And I hope you'll all look at the resources that Maggie has provided. And if you're facing a situation like this, we all are going to face it someday, that you'll keep all this in mind. So thank you again, Maggie, for being my guest today.
It's been my blessing.